G'day everyone, it's Matt and welcome to the podcast. My guest today is no stranger to motorsport. He's been racing since the age of 16 and has been involved with the motorsport community here in South Australia ever since. What would you say about a Goodwood Festival of Speed type event held utilising parts of the Adelaide Grand Prix Formula One circuit? Pretty good, right? Well, it happened every year from 2014 to 2018. And in each of those 5 years, it grew from strength to strength, the Adelaide Motorsport Festival. When we head along to an event, we often get caught up with everything that's happening at the time and give little thought to the time, planning, and everything that goes on behind the scenes to make it happen. The Adelaide Motorsport Festival ceased operating in 2019 due to state government funding cuts. However, there have been calls ever since to bring this amazing event back. Tim Possingham is the owner and event director of the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, and along with his team, he was the man who made this all possible. I caught up with Tim for a chat to discuss the past, the present, and the future. I hope you enjoy it. Tim, thanks for your time. Racing since you were 16, take us back. Where did it all start?
Both my parents raced cars, so my mother and my father. And they used to do hill climbs and circuit sprints and things like that. So, to be honest with you, I hated cars when I was a kid because I used to get picked up and put in all of these cars all the time and dragged to events and things like that. And motor racing's sort of 80% hanging around and maybe 20% racing at best. So, as a kid, I didn't particularly love it. But when I got my license when I was 16. And I had a little Leyland Mini at the time. I started to get right into it, and I did get a CAMS license when I was 16, and I started doing sprints and things like that, and did a lot of work on the car myself. And back then we'd have Gregory's manuals and things like that you'd read, to sort of learn how you do everything. And then I moved on to things like Datsun 1600s and Cortinas and Mazda Rotaries and whatnot. But yeah, my involvement in motorsport goes back further than when I had my license at 16, back to, I suppose, when my parents were racing cars.
Was that your first race car then, Tim? Did you start racing the Mini?
Yeah, it was. So actually, that Mini wasn't. That died a death going into a fence for those in Adelaide. They would know that down at Mitcham there's a road called Grange Road, and it's got a railway crossing that's got a big hump in it. Oh, back in the days of being young and stupid, we used to jump over that and get airborne. And I remember flying over it, and I was airborne, and there was an orange Sigma wagon pulling out of a side street about 50 metres in front. So I just wrenched on the steering wheel, and we went one way and managed to dodge the Sigma, but I went straight into a fence, and the fencing just near the crossing there used to be made out of train line, so that didn't move, but certainly the rest of the car moved. And grabbed the front right wheel, turned the engine around in the engine bay, the wheel came back right into the cabin, and I wrote the car off. And anyway, I ended up building another Mini, and had quite a collection of them, and they were always I didn't have a lot of money then, so things were always packing up and breaking on them and whatnot. But yeah, Minis were the first sort of port of call until I snapped a crank in one out at Malala one day, and that was it. And then I ended up selling the whole lot of them.
Yeah, I remember listening to an interview with James Hunt, Formula One world champion and co-commentator with Murray Walker back in the Adelaide Grand Prix days. He said his first race car was a Mini, very popular first race car, handled like a go-kart and easy to work on.
Yeah, we lived up in the Adelaide Hills, and the Mini on what's now known as the old freeway, you could mix it with XC1 Tiranas and things like that, particularly going downhill. It certainly did handle like a go-kart.
I guess we'll just wind the clock forward a little bit there, Tim, and come on to the Adelaide Motorsport Festival. There's been some great content lately going up on the Adelaide Motorsport Festival Facebook page, and urge anybody who hasn't done so already to jump on there and have a look. Where did that all start? Where did the idea come from?
Well, look, it started back with the Sporting Car Club and my involvement with them, and they were looking at trying to do what they called an around the houses event, and then I got involved when there was this one other gentleman, Peter Whelan, who was fairly instrumental in things at that time, was suggesting that maybe we should share some infrastructure with the Adelaide 500 and try to do something on the track. And I remember meeting with the SA Motorsport board and talked about cooperating and maybe using that track. And then without going into all the detail, we ended up delivering an event that was a little sprint event on the section of the Victoria Park circuit and a hill climb up at Windy Point, and that was 2014, and that was greatly done with the Sporting Car Club at that time.
Yeah, I mentioned in the introduction that, I thought that the event was very much like the Goodwood Festival of Speed, just with the short course and all of the cars laid out around the place for people to look at. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, certainly that was our mission, and my vision was to try to take it to that place. And I think given the particularly constraints in terms of financial constraints, we're well on the way to developing what would have been the Goodwood of the Southern Hemisphere, a lot of people referred to it as. But we really hit our straps in about 2018. And, I think that's when our growth in terms of, it did have growth year on year. So we went from 1,800 people to 58,000 people from 2014 to 2018. Certainly grew in that respect. But in terms of the quality of the content and the cars and activities, obviously you just got to try to raise the bar every year. And in 2018, we definitely was that sort of vision, that Goodwood style event was evident there. And the event was planned to run in 2019, and I think in 2019 we had around about 550 metres of corporate space. So there was, I think, in the high 300s, and what I mean by this is along the trackside fence on the eastern side of the circuit, you had brands like Ferrari and Brabham and Aston Martin and all those along there, and it had grown to the point where we had some other sort of big automotive brands involved, and supercars themselves were interested in doing a post-season Christmas party for all of their all of the team owners and things like that at the event. So we had it was really going to explode in 2019, but unfortunately funding got cut. It was at a time when GST revenue federally back to the state was cut to the tune of $500 million, and so there were cuts in several different places, and tourism was one, and events, and probably viewed as being a little bit of a luxury compared to other essential services and things like that. So we got cut along with there was a fashion festival, horse trials, there was a series of other events, and that was it, unfortunately. So 2019, I ran the Adelaide Rally, which I own, and we ran that without any support for 1 year, and tried to make a go of that, and then we got some government support for 2020, and which the 2020 event, of course, due to COVID, it's meant to be November 2020, pushed into March 21, and we ran another event in November 21. We've got another Adelaide Rally event due to run this year, and there is a possibility it might run the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, but it's all going to boil down to an election, and it's probably all going to boil down to marginal seats within that election.
I don't really want to make it too political, but do you think if the Labor government gets in there, there is a high chance of the Motorsport Festival coming back? Is it locked in stone? Would it just be a case of...
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's locked in stone. So there's a policy around that. There's a well-publicised and documented policy that Labor have released around motorsport, which encompasses their support for car clubs and for an expansion of the conditional registration scheme, that being the club rego scheme, people would know it as, and of course the Adelaide 500 and the Adelaide Motorsport Festival returning. So that is set in stone, and we would be running in November, and very recently they just announced that the Adelaide 500 event will run first week of December. So we would run a week ahead of the Adelaide 500 and would share infrastructure. There's still, despite the fact that a lot of it has been sold off, there still is the right amount of infrastructure to deliver the Motorsport Festival component, the bit in Victoria Park. There's about 550 debris fence panels and barriers and things that are still in the state. There's a couple of overpasses and things like that. Yes, the bulk of the rest of it and the pit building have been sold off, and as I understand it, Supercars have been planning or working on solutions for all that kind of stuff, and they do deliver events elsewhere where the infrastructure isn't owned by the state, like Newcastle, Gold Coast, and in places like that. So I'm sure that they'll be able to solve those problems, and motorsport fans here in South Australia potentially could get a sort of a 10-day period with some really intense motorsport of the Adelaide Rally Motorsport Festival and Adelaide 500 sort of all coming together over that period.
Yeah, I guess we'll just see what happens at the election. I'm sure you already know it, but you're going to have to raise the bar pretty high to beat that last event that was in 2018. Australians Craig Lowndes, Jim Richards. I actually remember seeing Jim walk by, and I looked over and gave him a, g'day Jim, and a bit of a wave, and you expect him to say hello and give a wave and continue on his merry way. But no, he stopped and he came over and had a bit of a small talk and had a photo taken. You had F1 drivers there, Ivan Capelli, Stefan Johansson, Pierluigi Martini, World Superbike champion Troy Bayliss. It might sound like a bit of a silly question, but what do you think drew them all to the event? I mean, there's lots of events that they could go to. Why did they go to the Adelaide Motorsport Festival?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I know these people personally through different connections, and all of them loved Adelaide. I mean, Adelaide was genuinely a loved event. You got to remember that the Adelaide Grand Prix was the last event of the season. It's arguably the most awarded event in what we might call the golden era of Formula One. That's arguable, but when you've got your Ayrton Sennas, your Prosts, your Mansells, and all of those sorts of guys in cars that are I mean, back then we had tobacco money, of course, so heavily funded teams that were driving cars that were high horsepower cars with underdeveloped aero in some cases. They were exciting to watch. There was a lot of action. There was a lot of incidents, and Adelaide was the biggest event on the calendar. Of course, it held several attendance records. And you think about it, Adelaide's a town of 1.6 million people. It's not a New York, it's not a London, it's not a Sydney sort of thing. But we really punched above our weight, had great crowds, and these drivers remember that fondly. So they want to come back and relive part of it. And Stefan in particular, I've got to say, he absolutely loved it and was quite emotional. In fact, when we put him back in his Ferrari that he drove here in 1985, the exact same car, and prior to the Motorsport Festival starting, of course, we do this thing called the Peak Hour of Power on the Friday night, where a selection of vehicles that are in the festival drive with police escort through what's called a green light corridor, where we turn all the lights green, or the government does, in coordination with police, and we escort them through the city to Goodger Street, and there's a street party, and then they come back again. And so Stefan got in his Ferrari, and it's the first time he'd driven it for 30 odd years, and he said just the feel of the gear knob, because of course, it's manual dog box type transmission, not paddle shift or sequential or anything, still H pattern. The feel of the gear knob in his hand, the sound of the car, everything about it. When he got to Goodger Street, and there's just lined with people, and thousands of people there watching him drive in, he became really quite emotional about the whole thing. So they love that reminiscing piece. They love reliving, some of the best times of their lives. I mean, who doesn't? So, that's an attraction. There's drivers that are at a different level that, there's a commercial side to it as well that, you've got to pay to come. But I don't think I'd be incorrect in saying that anyone who's raced here in Adelaide wouldn't love coming back to sort of relive some of those moments. And some of these people are living in countries, you've got to remember that they're in the middle of winter or approaching it when we're coming into our summer season here. So it's not a bad part of the world to come to at that time of year if you're in the Northern Hemisphere anyway.
Yeah, there are also some great cars brought over. I think one of them being Ayrton Senna's Lotus 97T.
Correct. We brought that over, I can't remember what year that was, whether that was 16 or 17, but and we hope to bring that back again. That owner's really enthusiastic about what we do here and loved his time here. But unfortunately, he hadn't done a lot of testing on the vehicle after he'd finished it in Europe and didn't pick up on a problem that was with the oil system. And anyway, it suffered an oil pump issue when it arrived here. And then a local team BRM, that take care of the Formula One cars when they're here with us, they attempted to rectify it and did what they could, but I think they did rectify the oil pressure problem actually, but the lack of oil pressure momentarily that had happened with that prior had done some damage to the engine. I think it had picked up on a bearing and done a bit of bearing damage, and then when we got the car out to do some laps, it didn't get far, and then it ended up doing a bearing, and it threw a conrod and it threw it straight through the side of the block. So it was a catastrophic failure. However, I was prepared for some bad feedback on that. Of course, it's well out of my control, but the general consensus was, people just said, I'm just happy that the car's here and I got to see it, circulate at least once. Got to hear it, and the fact that you've got that car back here, even if it's a static display, ended up being on static display. People were still greatly appreciative of that and what we tried to do. So, look, we intend on bringing that car back again, and we've got a whole heap actually that we'd like to see come and take part in the event. And should we be lucky enough to have funding reinstated, I think the level of funding would be such that we can try to grow the event rapidly again, and like you mentioned before, raise the bar is really important for us. The key to a good event is you need familiarity, so you need people to come and see the same sorts of things they've seen at the event previously, to see it again, so that they understand that core DNA of the event and what it is. But at the same time, it has to be fresh every year, or have some fresh features. So we definitely, if we were to run this event again, we would be having several recognisable things that people have seen before, or identities that people have seen before. So they go, oh great, he's back again, or I'm hoping that they have this car again because I've loved it every year, and they go, oh yeah, they've got it back again. But at the same time, we do need to raise the bar, and we're certainly talking to people that are world champion status, former Formula One world champions. We're looking at a whole host of different vehicles, and whether that be interesting NASCARs and Indy cars through to that don't have a history on that track, but they're interesting in their own right, through to Formula One cars that have got a deep connection with that place, that tarmac here in Victoria Park.
You mentioned about them being just happy to have the car on display. One of the things that I found great about the event was, well, you go to some events and if you don't have the right pass, you can't get in here. And if you don't have the right lanyard, you can't go there. But everything just seemed so open. You could get right up close to the cars, get nice photos with the cars. I don't think any of the drivers are off limits.
That again, yeah, that's another key thing. There's two parts to that. One thing is the removal of obstacles. Like, let's face it, when you put up barriers for anything, and I mean, when someone wants to do something, get something, experience something, and you've got to jump through hoops to get to it, it diminishes the experience. If you go to a motorsport event and you pay $100 and something to get in, and then you've got to pay another $80 to get through the next gate so that you can be within 50 metres of Craig's Lounge, and then you've got to then pay for some other $200 experience to actually be in the same room as him or whatever. There's just, it's one thing after another you've got to jump through, and I think it diminishes the experience. At AMF, Adelaide Motorsport Festival, our philosophy is we want everyone to be able to get up close, within reason, in terms of safety and stuff, to the cars. I want to see kids come up to a 1980s Formula One car and be able to stick their finger into the tyre and go, oh, isn't that squishy? And, smell what that car smells like when it's coming off the track, and you can smell the brakes and the engine and hot oil and all of that kind of stuff. That's what we want to deliver, and we do want those drivers to be accessible. So that's always the way it's been, where you can just walk along at AMF and you'll just see Lowndes or John Bowe or, Alistair McRae or whoever it is just walking past. And they're in a fantastic mood too, because these guys, they love the event because it's fun. I mean, we've put Lowndes in Formula One cars, and he's been in Le Mans cars at our event, and then you walk into the Ferrari VIP area, and you look for him, and he's making pizzas. He's literally behind it, just having fun, making pizzas, having a beer with people, and he's just having an absolute ball. So the key is to show them a good time and not wrap them up with a heavy sort of schedule of they've got to be here and do this thing that they don't want to do, or that they don't want to do. When I negotiate with them, it's sort of like, this is what we would like to do, and you can pick what you'd like to do and what you don't want to do, and we've just tried to make it fun so they get what they want, and it is almost like having a holiday. So yeah, we'll always I can't see why we wouldn't maintain that philosophy of that sort of access all areas type thing. It's part of the key to the event. And the other thing that makes the event successful is something new being on track every 15 minutes. So I liken it to this. I liken it to sitting down to a meal. I can go to a motorsport event that's the same thing over and over and over again for the whole day, and I feel like I've just sat down to a bowl of pasta that's half a metre high, and it tasted great for about the first 10 spoonfuls or forkfuls, but after that I'm getting bored of it. And then by the time I got to the bottom of the bowl, I'm well and truly full, and I'm feeling sick because I just had so much of the same thing. What I am trying to deliver to the people is almost like a degustation or a smorgasbord, where it's you'll get a tasty little morsel of this, and that's a bite-sized piece of something, and then there's another little tasty morsel and another one. But of course it's the on-track activity, so they'll be standing there or sitting there and they'll see Formula One cars, and after 15 minutes of that, then we've got drift cars, and then there'll be a plane landing in the park racing a car, or Troy Bayliss doing 2-up rides on his World Superbike or whatever, just different stuff all the time to keep you engaged, constantly.
Just on drivers, are there any drivers that you would like to see at future events?
Yeah, there is, and I won't name them, and we have been talking to them, and there's some drivers that have really close connections with the Adelaide circuit. For many different reasons. Either a race here has decided something that's gone in their favour, or they've had incidents on significant incidents, like accidents, let's say.
I think we might be able to guess who that might be.
Anyway, there's people that we've been communicating with, and they already understand the event, and we're just going to continue those conversations. And because at the moment we can't do anything. I mean, unfortunately, as it stands at the moment, there isn't funding for the event, and funding for the event doesn't look particularly likely as things sit right now. So, the reality is, I don't want to make it a political sort of discussion, but just the facts are that there's one side of politics that will ensure that this event comes back and continues to run for some time. And the alternative is different to that.
Like I said in the intro, there's a lot of time and planning that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people who head along to an event don't see. As an event organizer, do you speak with drivers and owners of cars, and they might not be able to commit to 1 year, but they can the next? Or what's the lead time on those sort of things?
Yeah, there's a few different parts to that. So there's conversations that you have with people about the year at hand, let's call it, and if those people can't attend for whatever reason, then we normally sort of put them aside or put them on ice for the next year, so keep those conversations going for 18 more. And then there's the immediate planning is it's a year out. I mean, with the rally, because remember the Adelaide Rally is part of the Motorsport Festival, in effect they overlap. The rally planning goes over a year. We're normally planning the route for the following year just before we've delivered the one at hand. That's challenging. We close 135 roads and up to 13 different council regions and affect a couple of thousand residents directly. So that's something that is a bit more involved. The planning can be quite extensive. At the moment, we're doing as much planning as we can for the Motorsport Festival without employing staff, and spending a great deal of money at the moment, just in case things go the way that they could. Then we would have to deliver an event this November.
You mentioned about the hour of power through the city, but recently shared on the Adelaide Motorsport Festival Facebook page was the Race to the City video, which I think was the promo for 2017.
Yeah, 17 then 18 we did too, yeah.
Well, just on that, if somebody said, we want to shoot a promotional video through the city in the dead of night, we want Formula One cars on the street, 2- and 4-wheel machines, we want a world superbike out there, I think the first response most people would say is tell him he's dreaming, but you did it. How hard was that to achieve?
Yeah, it's hard, but that, like everything I do, if it's easy, everyone else is doing it, and if it's easy, it hasn't got the impact, So, I unfortunately only do the hard stuff, and yeah, it is difficult, but there's always a pathway to make something happen. I'm a problem solver by nature, so if there's something I want to do and someone says no, I want to sort of understand why is the answer no, and if they actually give you a proper descriptive answer, then we'll set about solving those problems, which usually is all about mitigating risk. It's all about safety and risk. So to get it down to an acceptable level where it can go ahead. I've already got an idea about what Race to the City 2022 will look like. So we have got a plan that we hope we'll get to push the button on at some point, and that is that will take all the elements that people loved out of the previous videos that we did, and again, like we have to do if we bring the Motorsport Festival back, we'll just amplify that. We'll just turn it up to another level, and that will feature Formula One cars and Formula One cars from several different eras, and some other different types of vehicles, some other interesting, notable people. It'll be city-based. In fact, the plan at the moment is to film the entire race to the city within the city. One part of it, actually, and I don't mean on a track either. So it's pretty cool. I'm hoping that we get to deliver that. We get to create that and deliver that. And in fact, that will be one of the first things that we have to do. We'd have to put a team together, obviously, and get things underway for the greater festival. But that promo piece is key, and we'd be wanting to film that in the middle of winter time, I'd imagine, ready to sort of get it out in spring for promoting the event, which we hope will be at the end of spring, just about to come into summer.
Tim, that all sounds very exciting. The mouth's starting to water, put it that way. I personally hope that the 2022 event can go ahead, but obviously you do need that funding. Now, some people say that events need to stand on their own 2 feet and be self-sufficient, but the government gave away taxpayer money in the form of the Great State Voucher program. Some people were excited about that, but that entices people to go out to spend money to stimulate the economy. Does event funding work in pretty much the same way?
No, it's measured in a different way. Usually it's measured the economic benefit of the state, and the bed nights are the things that they're mostly focused on. And in 2018, the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, encompassing the Adelaide Rally, the whole deal, delivered nearly $10 million of economic benefit to the state. And then we did another, and this is of course done by a separate third party, do this event reporting and the analysis, and then we had another body again do the work on it not that long ago and came back with a very similar number. So that's the benefit to the state, and the state looks at it like there's a few different ways. Mostly they look at it like, if we inject X amount of dollars into this event, what's the return going to be to the state that translates into that economic benefit to hotels and restaurants and such and such. All then starts to translate into jobs as well, apart from the fact that I'm a firm believer of this, that we use only South Australian suppliers for everything. The only money that in 2018 that went into state was really money to insurance and permits and licensing with the regulatory body Motorsport Australia, that's our chosen regulator for the event, and also the our TV crew. But mostly everything else was kept here. So I'm talking about caterers and event suppliers with marquees and security and everything from golf carts to toilets to you name it. So there's genuine benefit there, but there's also intangible benefit, because I think this is what some people in government have realised, is that motorsport in South Australia is part of the fabric of who we are here. So, in fact, I'll go off on a tangent here. A friend of mine, sent me a message the other day saying that in France, the French government allocate funding towards art, culture, and events that don't make sense, to be honest with you. That don't deliver a great economic benefit, but it is done to, I suppose, deliver culture and experience and vibrancy in society, in that place that they live. Now, here in South Australia, the majority of I shouldn't say majority, a vast number of people seem to have a connection with motorsport. I don't know whether it's come from right back in the early 1900s when we actually had the first motorsport event in the entire country. Was held on a board track oval course around what is now the Adelaide Oval, believe it or not. And then we went on to having, we had the Australian Grand Prix here several years, prior to what people know as the Formula One Grand Prix. That was from 1985 onwards. But of course, we've had the Grand Prix. Then we've had this very, very large, touring car race, the Adelaide 500, Clipsal 500. So it's sort of entrenched in us. And the party atmosphere that goes with us, with it and whatnot, is just something that's just what a lot of people have grown up with. So that's the intangible piece. That's the piece that it might not, well, in our case, it certainly does stack up the financial side of it. But, there's this other side where it doesn't really need to. It's about, delivering events that make us who we are and harks on our history. And certainly now when you look at things like Senna chicane and who Ayrton Senna was and the golden era of Formula One that was in our backyard in Adelaide, basically, it's really important to maintain that legacy. It's really important to maintain that connection. I mean, if you listen to Formula One commentary, and I heard this the other day that from a Formula One commentator, that Adelaide has been referenced more in the last 18 months, I think it was, in Formula One commentary than it had for the last 5 years. It's because Adelaide was such a decider. There was a lot of things that happened in Adelaide that, made people world champions or constructors world champions and, whatever. And in the last 18 months, we've had several other little incidents or things happen in Formula One where it prompts the commentator to go, the last time this happened was in Adelaide, or back in Adelaide this happened, or whatever. So, Adelaide is famous for this, and we shouldn't let it go. So there are other reasons to have events other than just economic benefit of the state.
Just quickly on that, just talking around the history of the Adelaide Grand Prix track, do you reckon there's any chance that they could make the section through Victoria Park State Heritage listed?
I think that they could. I think they could. I don't see why not. I can't see any reason why they wouldn't. I think they would, because it's multiple use. It's a multi-use thing. It's not like it's sitting there idle. I mean, well, at the moment it's being used as a COVID testing station, but it's convenient in respect to things like that. They obviously did use it to start the solar challenge, and we use it for things like pedal pre and this cycling and several other things like that. So I think it could be.
Well, that's true. It is multiple use. You only have to go for a drive or walk past there and see people out there riding their bikes or running or walking around that section of the track. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. You've been involved with organising the Adelaide Motorsport Festival and the Adelaide Rally. If there's someone out there listening who wants to get into organising events, whether it be an event for their local sporting club or their local community group, even something simple like running a cake stall, what advice would you give to someone wanting to get into organising events?
I think probably doesn't relate to the sort of the stall holder thing, but the concept, the event concept, the overarching concept. Some things that I mentioned before, like the event's got to be, well, ultimately it's got to be unique, and that unfortunately might mean that it's hard to do. So I think people should think outside the square to try to do something new or something extreme. And if they get knocked back, I think they need to, just keep working harder to find ways of overcoming those obstacles so they can sort of deliver the vision. And because if they do something that's sort of extreme or difficult, it's something that usually is unique. And I think that they need to refresh what they're doing all the time.
Yeah.
And they always need to look at it from the customer's perspective. What would you like to see? So, much like when I was talking about the economic benefit of the state versus the intangible benefits and the other things. When you're an event organizer, sometimes you've got to look at, certainly the event needs to be financially viable, but, sometimes you've got to look at, well, do we charge people to see Craig Lowndes, or do we just make it like such, so that people can just have access to him, so that, and you got to think, what does the punter want? Well, of course, that's an easy one. So that's all. They just need to think about things from the customer's perspective, and it needs to be sustainable. So back on that financial piece, is that you need the money to do it properly, and otherwise don't do it. You just can't do it at all, and that's where we were at a bit. Back in sort of 17, 18 was it was actually really difficult to try to deliver the event at the level that it was at then. The budget compared, let's say we were delivering nearly a quarter of the economic benefit to the state that the Adelaide 500 did, depending on which figures, you've had delivered to you at what time, but around about, let's just say, as an estimate. And but for a minute fraction of the amount, and it makes it really, really difficult. We were doing contra deals with suppliers for toilets and fencing and things where we were paying a fee, but we were also, giving them extra tickets to get in, and we're doing whatever we had to try to make the thing work. So it really was run with a very small budget for the size of the event that it was. So properly funded, it really could go to a far, far, far greater level, yeah.
Well, I'll cross my fingers and toes and hope the 2022 Adelaide Motorsport Festival goes ahead. You've mentioned a few times the Adelaide Rally coming up later this year, another great event that combines some of our state's great driving roads with some of the best cars and drivers in the business. Happy to catch up then for another chat?
Absolutely, for sure.
Thanks, Tim. Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. We'll chat soon.
Enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
And that wraps up the podcast. Did you head along to the Adelaide Motorsport Festival? What was your favourite part about it? It was great talking to Tim, hearing his side about the event, and that discussions are already underway if it comes back. I can't help but wonder though, who is the driver that Tim was referring to? Who do you think it might be? Who would you like to see there? Don't forget to follow along, and I look forward to joining you for another podcast soon. Bye for now.